It was supposed to be just another quiet Saturday morning. The kind of morning where you roll out of bed late, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and maybe step outside to enjoy the stillness of the neighborhood before the day really begins. But that morning turned out to be anything but ordinary. That morning changed the way I saw my neighborhood, my neighbors, and especially my HOA forever. The first sign that something was off was the knock at the door. Not a polite, casual knock, the kind you expect from a neighbor asking to borrow some sugar or tell you your car lights were left on. No, this was heavy, loud, authoritative, the kind of knock that makes your heart skip a beat because it carries a sense of urgency, maybe even intimidation. When I opened the door, I was met by a man in uniform. At first glance, it looked official: dark navy shirt, patches on the shoulders, even a shiny badge pinned to his chest. He stood tall, arms crossed, and his tone matched the image. He claimed he was there on behalf of the HOA and that there had been multiple reports of violations at my property. He rattled off words like non-compliance, enforcement, and fines. The way he spoke, it was as if he had the power of the law behind him. But here's the thing. Something about him didn't feel right. His uniform wasn't exactly what I recognized from the local police department. The badge seemed more like something you'd buy online, rather than one issued by the city. And his car, parked on the street, wasn't a patrol car at all. It was just a plain sedan with no markings. Still, the way he carried himself was convincing enough that I knew most people would have just taken his word and panicked. The supposed officer told me that the HOA had received multiple complaints against me. According to him, my trash bins weren't stored properly, my lawn was out of regulation length, and even my car, parked in my own driveway, was a violation of community rules. The way he listed it off, you'd think I was some kind of criminal. But the truth was, none of these things were true. My bins were put away, my grass had been cut the day before, and my car was perfectly within the guidelines. That's when suspicion turned into realization. This wasn't law enforcement at all. This was someone hired to intimidate me, someone pretending to have power they didn't actually have. And if my gut was right, the HOA was the one pulling the strings. You see, for weeks leading up to this, there had been tension between me and the HOA board. They had been sending letters about violations that didn't exist, pushing fines that I refused to pay, and threatening legal action that they knew they couldn't take. They wanted control, and they hated when homeowners pushed back. So when this man showed up at my door, pretending to be an officer, it felt like their latest move in a long-running game of intimidation. I didn't react the way they probably expected. Instead of arguing or panicking, I kept calm. I let the man talk, nodding as he laid out his official orders. But while he spoke, I quietly pulled out my phone. I pressed record and captured every second of the interaction, the fake badge, the false authority, the claims that didn't make sense. At first he didn't notice, but when he finally realized, his tone shifted. He started to stumble over his words, avoiding direct answers, and even tried to cut the conversation short. It was all the proof I needed. Proof that the HOA wasn't just harassing me with letters and empty threats anymore. They had escalated to something far more serious. They had hired someone to impersonate an officer of the law. When he left, I stood there in my doorway, phone still in hand, heart racing. The morning sun was shining, kids were riding bikes down the street, and neighbors were trimming their hedges. On the surface, it looked like a peaceful suburban community. But now, I knew the truth. Behind the neatly painted fences and manicured lawns, there was something rotten in the heart of the neighborhood. That video on my phone was a ticking time bomb, because once it got out, it wasn't just going to expose the man who came to my door. It was going to expose the entire HOA. And I had a decision to make. Do I stay quiet, delete the video, and hope the harassment stops, or do I go public, blow the whistle, and take the fight to them? At that moment, I didn't realize just how big of a storm I was about to unleash, because what started as a simple Saturday morning was about to spiral into a battle that would shake the entire neighborhood and bring the HOA to its knees. By the time Sunday rolled around, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in uniform. His face, his tone, the way he carried himself, it all replayed in my head like a broken record. It didn't sit right with me that someone could just show up at my front door, pretend to be law enforcement, and try to scare me into obeying rules that weren't even real. What sat even worse was knowing deep down that the HOA was behind it all. I had the video saved safely on my phone. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with it. My instinct told me to keep it close, maybe use it as leverage if the HOA came after me again. But the more I watched it, the more I realized this wasn't just about me. This was bigger. Because if they had sent this fake officer to my house, then chances were I wasn't the only target. How many of my neighbors had been intimidated? How many families had been scared into paying fines they didn't actually owe? So I made the decision. I uploaded the video online. I didn't just send it to a friend or two. I posted it in the neighborhood social group, the one where residents shared updates about yard sales, lost pets, and block parties. I knew the HOA board monitored that group.
I knew they hated when people questioned their authority.
And I knew the moment the video went live, things would never be the same. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. People were shocked. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The so-called officer's uniform looked just convincing enough to fool someone at first glance, but now that it was frozen in screenshots, everyone saw the truth. The patches didn't match our local police department. The badge was clearly generic. The car parked outside was just a beat-up sedan. Neighbors began asking the same question I had been asking since that knock at my door. Who sent him? And more importantly, why? Some residents started sharing their own stories. One woman said she had received a late-night visit from someone claiming to be community enforcement. Another admitted she had paid hundreds of dollars in fines after a uniformed man warned her she'd be taken to court if she didn't comply. Each story was eerily similar: fake authority, intimidation, and ties back to the HOA. The neighborhood that had always prided itself on being quiet and peaceful was suddenly alive with suspicion and outrage. People weren't just upset, they were angry. And for the first time, their anger wasn't directed at each other. It was aimed squarely at the HOA. Behind the scenes, though, the board wasn't taking this lightly. Within hours, an official email went out to all homeowners. They called the video misleading, claimed the man in uniform was part of a licensed compliance team, and accused me of inciting division within the community. They said the matter was being handled internally and urged residents to avoid sharing unverified media. But the problem for them was that nothing about the video was unverified. The truth was right there in front of everyone's eyes, and the more they tried to downplay it, the guiltier they looked.
By Monday morning,
The story had spread beyond our little group. Someone had shared the video to a citywide forum, and soon enough, local residents outside our neighborhood were commenting too. People recognized the fake cop's face. They pointed out that he wasn't law enforcement at all. He was a private security guard who had been fired months ago for impersonating an officer. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. The HOA hadn't just bent the rules. They had knowingly hired someone with a history of pretending to be a cop, sent him into our neighborhood, and let him threaten families under the guise of enforcement. That revelation lit a fire under the community. Homeowners began organizing, holding informal meetings, and talking openly about removing the current board. Some even started digging into the HOA's financial records, questioning where all the association fees had been going. The HOA board members tried to push back. They sent letters threatening lawsuits for defamation. They claimed homeowners who questioned them were putting property values at risk. They even hinted that those who spread false information could face fines of their own. But the intimidation tactics weren't working anymore, not after the video, not after everyone had seen the truth with their own eyes. The breaking point came when one resident managed to get hold of a contract. It was a document between the HOA and a so-called compliance services company. And on that contract, the name of the same man who had shown up at my door. The fake cop wasn't some random encounter. He was officially hired, paid for with our own association fees to act as muscle for the board. At that moment, there was no denying it anymore. The HOA hadn't just crossed a line, they had leapt over it. The board had tried to scare us into silence, but instead, they had united the entire neighborhood against them. And while the video had started it all, what came next was going to be the real battle. Because the residents were no longer asking questions, they were demanding accountability. And the HOA? They were scrambling to cover their tracks. But no matter what they did, there was no going back. The days that followed felt like living inside a storm. The neighborhood was buzzing, louder than I had ever seen it. Neighbors who once waved politely from a distance were now gathered in small clusters on sidewalks, at driveways, and inside living rooms, talking in hushed but determined tones. The fake cop wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was the spark that ignited a firestorm of resistance. The HOA board, the same people who had controlled the community for years with letters, fines, and threats, suddenly looked fragile. Their carefully maintained image of authority was unraveling piece by piece. The more they tried to tighten their grip, the more people slipped through their fingers. It didn't take long for local news stations to catch wind of the story. One evening, I turned on the television and saw my own street on the screen. Reporters were standing outside the subdivision, microphones in hand, calling it one of the most bizarre homeowner association scandals in the city. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, "Neighborhood accuses HOA of hiring fake cop to enforce rules." The footage from my phone, the knock at the door, the shaky badge, the nervous stumble when he realized he was being recorded, played over and over. Each time it aired, more people saw the truth, and each time, the HOA's grip on the community weakened further. The fake cop himself wasn't invisible anymore either. His face was everywhere. Online forums dissected his past, exposing his history of impersonation and failed security jobs. People dug into records and uncovered that he had even been warned by law enforcement in the past about pretending to be an officer. The HOA couldn't claim ignorance. They had hired him knowingly, given him money, and sent him to knock on doors under false pretenses. That was the final straw for many. A group of homeowners, now organized into a coalition, filed an official complaint with the city and the state's attorney general's office. They provided the contract that had been uncovered, the video I recorded, and testimony from multiple residents who had been intimidated. Suddenly, this wasn't just neighborhood drama. It was a legal matter. Investigators began digging into the HOA's finances. What they found shocked even the most skeptical homeowners. Association fees had been funneled into questionable contracts, unnecessary compliance programs, and even personal reimbursements for board members. The money that was supposed to maintain our parks, repair sidewalks, and improve community facilities had been drained away. The fake cop was only one piece of a much larger puzzle of corruption. The board tried everything to save themselves. They denied, they deflected, they blamed clerical errors and miscommunication. But with each excuse, more evidence surfaced. Homeowners brought out letters, emails, and records. Every lie the board told crumbled under the weight of receipts. Then came the emergency meeting. The community center was packed wall to wall that night. People who had never once attended an HOA meeting were now standing shoulder to shoulder, furious and determined. The board sat at their table at the front of the room, their usual smug expressions replaced with unease. For years they had spoken down to homeowners, hiding behind policy and procedure. But this time, they were the ones on the defensive. One by one, residents stood up to speak. They recounted the harassment, the bogus fines, the intimidation, and finally, the visits from the fake officer. Every voice carried the same message. Enough is enough. The board tried to gavel the room into silence, but it was too late. The homeowners had found their voice, and it was louder than the gavel. A vote was called to remove the board. For the first time in the history of the neighborhood, nearly every homeowner showed up to cast their ballot. The result wasn't even close. The board was dissolved that very night.
It felt like a dam breaking.
Relief, anger, and triumph all at once. The people who had tormented the community for years were finally stripped of their power. In the weeks that followed, investigations continued. The fake cop was questioned by real authorities, and charges were considered for impersonation and unlawful intimidation. The former HOA board members were audited, and at least one faced criminal charges for misuse of funds. Slowly but surely, justice caught up to those who thought they were untouchable. As for the neighborhood, it wasn't the same, but in a good way. People who had once lived in fear of letters and fines now greeted each other with a newfound sense of unity. The coalition of homeowners formed a temporary committee to manage the community, this time with transparency and accountability. Meetings were open, decisions were shared, and no one had to worry about fake badges showing up at their door again. Looking back, it's almost surreal how it all started. One knock at my door on a Saturday morning, one man pretending to be something he wasn't, and one decision to press record on my phone. That single moment exposed the truth, toppled an entire HOA board, and reminded everyone in the neighborhood that power only exists if people are willing to believe in it. The HOA thought they could silence us with fear. Instead, they gave us the one thing they never wanted us to have: proof. And once the truth was out, there was no stopping it. So if you ever hear a knock at your door and someone in uniform claims to be enforcing rules that don't quite make sense, look closer. Because sometimes the person standing there isn't who they say they are. And sometimes the people pulling the strings are about to get exposed.